Hi everyone, here I am doing yet another recording for AP Literature. This one is going to be just about the SIFT method of analyzing poetry. I just want to cover it since I couldn't be in class today, so I'm going to cover that, and then the second part of this is going to be specifically for situation. If you want an example of how to apply the situation analysis to a poem, I would advise you to check out the video that I just did on Sonnet 29. I'm doing these in reverse order, so I hope I don't repeat myself too much. All right, I'm going to start by presenting my a link to my course book, which you guys can find. I think this is page 100 here. It says 99 there, but this is the page of poetry terms. Yep, there it is on page 100 of the course book. I think the paginating changes after that. So on this page, here's what we've got. We've got poetry terms listed at the top, and I've organized them by this method. So I call it a SIFT. You can find the SIFT method of poetry analysis out there on the internet. I took that, kind of made it my own, and have been using this method for several years now, and it's kind of working out. So the first S is for situation. You can think of it as like the rhetorical situation. Some of you at Guilford might know this as the soapstone, which was speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, strategy, and tone, something like that. I use a simpler one, just a TARP, but same basic idea, right? So just trying to establish what is going on in the poem. The second S is for structure, and this is we'll cover when we get to it. The type and form of poetry. So if it's a sonnet, a villanelle, an ode, a lyric poem, a ballad. So we'll talk about all the different types and forms of poetry, and we'll talk about the structure on a page, lines and stanzas. Sound devices is how the poem uses sound. So things like alliteration, rhyme, assonance, consonants, all the different sound devices in poetry. Imagery is just that. It's the use of images, using words to form images in people's minds, whether that be visual images, auditory images, gustatory images. There's all kinds of different images. So imagery in poetry. And then figurative language is using things like similes and metaphors and synecdoches. I can never say that right. Oh my goodness. But there's all kinds of figures of speech. So when you're speaking figuratively, not literally, and of course in poetry, we get that all the time. And then of course, tone. What is the tone of the poem? How does, you might think of it as mood. Not a great word for it, but, just like you use a tone of voice, there is tone in poetry. So all of those are laid out, and as you scroll through or flip through the pages, you'll see all the different sound devices and the things that I've collected there for you in this packet. This is by no means complete. I have a giant literary terms dictionary that is like 600 pages long, and there's always more to cover. But for the purposes of this course, these are like the big ones that you need to know, especially going into the AP Literature test. So that's kind of what we're going to be using. And the idea of this is that anytime you encounter a poem and you want to analyze it completely, you should start with the S and then go down from there, right? So you start by just saying, do I know what the poem is saying? And what is it saying? Let me make sure that that is clear, or at least I have it clear in my head before I do anything else. Then we would take a look at the type and form of poetry. We would look at the stanzas and line breaks and enjambments and caesuras, and we would look at all these structural elements and see if there's any patterns or if that analysis gives us any insight into the poem. Then we would look at the sound devices, and then the imagery, and then the figurative language, and then the tone. And so this would be just a way to look at the same text through these different lenses to pull out more information about the poem and how it was crafted. Okay, so this week, and usually I do it about 1 week at a time, of course, in this hybrid COVID model teaching, who knows how long. I might spend 3 weeks on this. I want to make sure my students get it before I move on, because I can't exactly have you pop in during your lunch or after school for help. So this is, we're going to take our time. Anyway, so here we go. This week I'm kicking off the situation analysis, and I just want to make sure my students know how to get the situation out of a poem before we move forward. You can read all this, But essentially, here's the method that I use. I use the TARPS method, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on the strategy because that's really going to come in with the rest of the SIFT analysis. So what is TARPS? Well, TARPS is topic, audience, role, and purpose. So if I scroll down just a little bit, I can get it all in there on the screen. And we've got this. So the topic is literally just what is being spoken about. So after we read a poem, we should be able to say, oh, it's a poem about dolphins, or maybe like Ode to Autumn that I've already read a couple times is just, it's about autumn. That's good enough. As we move forward, we'll find that it becomes a lot more useful at this stage, like that initial first read. We want to be able to say something more specifically than just a two-word topic, right? So like Ode to Autumn, well, what is the poem saying about autumn? Well, it's a song of praise for autumn. That helps us kind of orient where we are thinking about this text before we do any other analysis. So that's what topic is. Audience is when we start asking to whom is the poem being spoken, right? And audience and role, I tend to do the role first, but I didn't want to make my acronym TRAP. I thought TARP was a lot better because a TARP covers things, and this kind of covers the whole poem, and TRAP didn't really work, so that's why I flipped them. I apologize if that bothers you. Okay, so anyway, the audience is the person or people to whom the poem is being spoken, right? It might not have a specific one. Some of the poems that we deal with early on do, just to make it easier for you guys to find it. And by the end of this week, we'll encounter at least one or two poems where the audience is not so specific. And so you'll have to use clues from the poem to try and figure out to whom is this poem being spoken. The role is the speaker. And the reason I call it role instead of speaker is because I want you to think about who is the speaker in relation to their audience. So do we have a lover speaking to another lover? Do we have a sibling speaking to another sibling? Do we have a child speaking to a parent? Do we have an adult speaking to an earlier version of themselves? All of these are different possibilities. So it's not just identifying who the speaker is, it's identifying what their relationship is to their audience. Now, why do we use these words speaker and role? Why don't we just say, oh, it's the poet, it's the author? Well, for the purposes of this class, it's never the author, right? I don't think that Will Shakespeare wrote as himself every time he wrote a poem. Maybe he did, but I don't know. Okay. He might have taken on some persona. He might have pretended that he was the King of England writing to the peasants of England. Who knows? Maybe he was pretending that he was the King of France writing to the King of England. And Shakespeare didn't really do this a whole lot in his poetry that we know of. But again, we don't know. So we try and shy away from referring to the poet or the author as the speaker. We're always going to want to refer to the speaker and the audience. I hope that clears that up now. It's really just a big point of contention there sometimes for students. The purpose is really just, is there a reason? Is the speaker trying to accomplish something? Answering those kind of questions. And usually it's pretty obvious. Most of the time it's just to explain something. We'll read a poem later on where in John Donne's poem, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, the speaker is forbidding his wife to mourn his loss or his absence. Right? Saying, do not, he's trying to persuade her. You don't need to grieve my absence. And that is the purpose of the poem. Very beautiful poem. I can't wait to get to it. One key point before we go any further. Usually this discussion centers around the idea of staying in the poem, staying close to the text. You'll definitely want to check out my analysis of Sonnet 29 to help you understand what I mean by that. But essentially, you cannot bring in outside information. Will Shakespeare is another good example of this. A lot of times people will say, oh, this was Will Shakespeare writing to his gay lover. Well, I don't know that he had a gay lover. There's some evidence that maybe he did, but all the evidence is from the text, and who knows? Okay, putting that argument aside, that would be bringing in outside historical information. And in this class, I'm trying to teach you what's called, quote, new criticism, where we are not going to deal with those historical facts. We're going to leave them aside. Okay, I just want you to stay with what the words tell you and not anything else, not what you feel, not what you think, not what your opinion is. Especially at this stage, we just want you to stay with the information that the text itself gives you. And that's also why I start with poetry, because the text doesn't give you a whole lot. Sometimes it does, a lot of the times it does not. So that kind of covers the SIFT method in brief, and then a little bit more detail on the rhetorical situation method that I use in this course, which is topic, audience, role, purpose. I hope that helps you to orient yourself today and for the rest of this week. Good luck, and again, text me if you have any questions. I will speak to you soon.